All right, ready for a deep dive into one of Tolkien's biggest enigmas.
I'm intrigued. Hit me with it.
We're talking about Tom Bombadil. You know, that jolly fellow who seems to exist outside the rules of Middle-earth.
Ah, Bombadil. Always a fascinating subject. What about him?
Well, today we're looking at this academic paper, and it asks whether he's just a charming oddity or a sort of hidden doorway to some profound wisdom.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
Get this. It connects Tom to a 13th century philosopher named Bonaventure and his 7 pillars of wisdom.
Now that's an unexpected pairing. How does the paper even begin to make that connection?
Well, it uses Bonaventure's work almost like a lens to understand Bombadil, and honestly, it reveals some pretty fascinating stuff about Tolkien's writing.
Okay, you've piqued my interest. Before we wander too far into the old forest of symbolism, though, can you give me a quick crash course? Who exactly was Bonaventure, and what are these pillars all about?
Imagine trying to construct like a house of wisdom.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So Bonaventure, this prominent theologian and philosopher, he provides the blueprint. And these pillars, they're like the essential support beams.
So each pillar represents, what, a different aspect of wisdom?
Exactly. Each one, chastity, innocence of mind, moderation in speech, things like that.
Yeah.
They each represent a stage in the journey towards spiritual growth, at least according to Bonaventure.
A sort of step-by-step guide to spiritual development. I like it. And how does the paper connect this back to Tolkien?
Well, one of the things I found really interesting was how the paper highlights the incredibly vivid way Bonaventure describes these virtues. It's not just some abstract list, but it's like tangible qualities we can actually see reflected, surprisingly, in the world of Middle-earth.
And in our own lives, too, I'd imagine.
Exactly. Which is what makes it so applicable. It's not just some dusty old philosophy book, It's got real-world relevance.
So are you saying we can find these pillars embodied in Tolkien's characters?
That's what this paper argues, yeah. And it specifically connects each pillar to Tom Bombadil, his wife Goldberry, even their home in the old forest. It's like Tolkien took these philosophical threads and wove them right into the fabric of his story.
That's fascinating. Okay, so where do we start? Give me an example.
Okay, let's start with pillar 1, chastity.
All right, chastity. Now, before anyone listening starts to tune out, thinking this is about to get a bit preachy.
I know, right?
It's about way more than just, physical purity, isn't it?
Absolutely. Think of it more as this kind of inner harmony, an alignment between what you think, what you say, and what you do, living in accordance with your true nature.
I like that. It's about being genuine, authentic.
Exactly. And when you think about Goldberry, especially how Tolkien describes her.
How so?
Well, he uses this almost biblical imagery, like elf queen clad in living flowers, enthroned in the midst of a pool, adorned with water lilies. I mean, come on.
Those are pretty loaded images. You don't just toss those in casually.
Exactly. Those details are incredibly intentional.
And they all point to this idea of purity, of connection to nature.
She's like the embodiment of this natural harmony. And then you have Tom's house, which seems to represent that sort of inner peace we're all searching for in the middle of chaos.
You mean how it's this tranquil haven in the midst of a rather menacing forest?
Yes, it's this island of peace and quiet. It makes you wonder if Tolkien was making a point about finding that same peace within ourselves, no matter what's going on around us.
Like the biblical story of Elijah, finding God's voice not in the storm, but in the stillness. This pillar, innocence of mind, it really reminds us to nurture those quiet spaces within ourselves, to cultivate those moments of stillness where we can connect with who we really are. Where do you find those moments?
Ooh, that's a good question. For me, we could save that for later. But I love how this whole discussion brings this ancient wisdom to life and makes it feel relevant to us, even if we're not, facing down ring wraiths in some ancient forest.
Absolutely. It makes you want to apply these principles to your own life. And speaking of chaos, I can't help but think about our next pillar, moderation of speech. And if there's anyone who embodies that, it's definitely Tom Bombadil.
Totally. He really understands when to speak and, more importantly, when to just be quiet. Like that moment when Frodo's bombarding him with all those questions about Old Man Willow, and Tom just replies, "Some things are best left unsaid until morning."
It's true. He doesn't waste words. He understands their power.
He makes me want to be more mindful about what I say, that's for sure.
It's not just about, not talking too much.
All right, it's deeper than that.
It's about recognizing that silence can be just as powerful, maybe even more so than words. But I think it's time we shifted gears a bit and explored a pillar that, it takes us deeper into Tom's world. And you know what? It connects to some pretty big questions we're wrestling with today.
You mean generosity in action? I'll admit, when I first saw that one on the list, I was picturing, like, donating to a charity or something.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap, isn't it?
But the paper argues that it's way more than that.
It definitely is. It's more about recognizing the unique gifts that you have to offer and using those gifts to benefit the world around you. It's less about these big, showy gestures and more about, I don't know, a way of being in the world, a way of moving through the world. Goldberry, with her incredible warmth and hospitality, she embodies this beautifully.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, picture this. You're trekking through this ancient forest, you're soaking wet, exhausted, probably a little terrified, honestly.
I'm starting to get a bit nervous just thinking about it.
And suddenly you're met with this incredible warmth, right? Like an invitation to a cozy fire, delicious food, and just genuine kindness. That's Goldberry.
She's the embodiment of welcome and hospitality.
And her generosity. It's not just about meeting those basic needs. It's about creating an entire atmosphere of welcome and renewal.
Exactly. And this actually brings us to a really fascinating point that the paper makes. It's that conversation between Goldberry and Frodo. You know, the one where Frodo asks if Tom owns the old forest?
Oh, yeah. And her response is so interesting.
She says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that would be a burden, which really makes you think. It challenges our whole idea about ownership, especially when it comes to nature.
Wow. I never thought about it like that, but it's true. It's like she's suggesting that true generosity means recognizing that we're a part of something so much bigger than ourselves, not the masters of it, which feels incredibly relevant right now, don't you think? When we're facing things like climate change and we're really grappling with our responsibility to the planet.
You're spot on, and that's what I love about this paper. It reminds us that the wisdom in these 7 pillars, it's not confined to some ancient text or even just a fictional world. They offer us these timeless insights into how we live, how we treat each other, and how we interact with the entire world around us.
It makes me wonder if Tolkien, through Tom and Goldberry, was trying to subtly nudge us into rethinking our own relationship with nature, to approach it with this spirit of generosity, understanding that we are all interconnected, and what impacts one of us impacts us all. We're still missing a few pillars, though. What about docility in effect? That one sounds a little passive to me, if I'm being honest.
Don't let the word fool you. It's not about blind obedience or anything like that. It's more about approaching the world with an open heart and an open mind, a willingness to learn from unexpected sources.
So being open to new ideas and ways of thinking.
Exactly. Like, think about how the hobbits, even though they're initially really wary of Tom, they open themselves up to him, to his wisdom. They can sense that there's something different about him, something they need, something they can learn from him.
That's true. They listen to him, even though he doesn't fit into any of their neat little boxes. He's not easily categorized as good or evil, a wise wizard, a dangerous creature. He challenges their assumptions, and instead of pushing back or, getting defensive, they lean into that discomfort.
And in doing so, they beautifully demonstrate this docility in effect. They're allowing themselves to be guided by something beyond what they currently understand. It's about being open to the unknown, even when it's a little unsettling.
I like that. Okay, now maturity and judgment. That feels like a quality we could all use a bit more of these days.
Oh, tell me about it, especially in a world that often seems to reward hasty reactions and snap judgments.
And Tom, he never seems to rush to judgment, ever.
Yeah.
He takes his time, he observes, he listens, and then he acts. And he always seems to act with this deep, deep understanding of how everything is connected. Like when he frees the hobbits from Old Man Willow, it's not about punishment, it's about restoring balance,
He sees the bigger picture, he understands the interconnectedness of all things.
Which brings us to our final pillar, simplicity of intention. What does Bonaventure have to say about that one?
Well, it's about approaching life with a clear and pure heart, free from all those ulterior motives and hidden agendas. It's about acting with authenticity, integrity.
Basically, being genuine and true to yourself.
Exactly. And when you really think about it, that pretty much sums up Tom Bombadil perfectly, doesn't it? He is who he is. No pretense, no apologies.
It's true. He's not trying to prove anything. He's not trying to control anything. He just is. And that's where his power comes from, I think. This whole conversation has really got me thinking about the paper's main point.
Which is?
That living ethically, living a good life, and caring for creation, they're not separate things. They're deeply, deeply intertwined. And Tom Bombadil, in his own way, he embodies that, don't you think?
100%. He doesn't stand on a soapbox preaching about protecting the forest. He lives in harmony with it. He doesn't lecture anyone about generosity. He embodies it in every single interaction. And by seeing that, by witnessing that, I think we're invited to consider a different way of being in the world. It's not about following a list of rules. It's about cultivating this posture of wisdom.
So instead of just focusing all our energy on saving the planet, maybe the more important question is how we become more like Tom. How do we cultivate that same sense of joy, that deep connection to the natural world, that incredible generosity of spirit? How do we do that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And you know, what's interesting is that the paper seems to suggest that by living according to these 7 pillars, chastity, innocence of mind, moderation of speech, all of them, by embodying those, we begin to embody wisdom itself.
So it's not about just knowing the right things to do. It's about actually living them out.
Exactly. And in doing so, we become part of the solution, not just to these big global crises, but also to the everyday challenges we face in our own lives, in our own relationships.
It's like the paper is giving us this call to action, but in a really subtle way. It's not a list of demands. It's more like a gentle nudge toward self-reflection.
I like that, a gentle nudge. Because it's not about forcing ourselves to change overnight. It's about this gradual process of growth.
Yeah. What if, instead of just trying to defend creation, we focused on simply being in creation in a way that honors its wisdom and reflects its beauty?
And what if, just like Tom, we allowed our very existence to be a force for good in the world?
That's a powerful thought to end on. Well, folks, there you have it, another deep dive into the surprising depths of Tolkien, philosophy, and maybe even ourselves.
The journey of self-discovery is never-ending.
So true. Until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and maybe, just maybe, keep a little bit of Tom Bombadil's wisdom close at hand.